Picture this: moonlight, ancient castle, and a mystery waiting to be solved. Let me tell you what happened next.
They're inherited. Awareness is freedom. And when you become aware, something inside you shifts. You start noticing the moments where you act from habit instead of truth. You begin recognizing that your inner critic isn't your voice at all. It's an old echo. Growing up isn't about paying bills or becoming independent. It's about learning to separate your identity from your upbringing. It's about questioning the emotional rules you inherited and asking, do these still serve me? Those old rules. Keep everything inside. Don't burden anyone. Stay small. Don't ask for help. Don't upset anyone. Don't show too much. May have kept you safe once, but now they're holding you back. They taught you endurance, not living. Functioning, not feeling. Adapting, not becoming. Surviving, not growing. And questioning those rules feels like betrayal because your mind associates them with safety. Your childhood threats are gone, yet part of you still behaves as if they're waiting around every corner. That's why you avoid difficult conversations, fear expressing emotions, hesitate to speak your truth, overthink every decision, and shrink yourself to keep the peace. These habits were inherited self-protection, but there comes a moment, quiet and unexpected, when you realize the life you're living isn't one you chose. It's the life you learned to maintain. And maintaining something that never belonged to you is the most exhausting burden to carry. So ask yourself gently, who would you be if you weren't trying to meet the standards of the father you grew up with? Who would you be if you weren't afraid of his disapproval or his silence or his unpredictability? Perhaps this is the moment you realize your weakness was never lack of strength. It was lack of permission. Permission you've been waiting for all your life, not realizing you can grant it to yourself. You can evolve beyond the patterns you inherited. You can become someone your father never had the chance to be. You can heal wounds, reactions, and the wounds he never healed. A father teaches you what to fear, what strength looks like, and how to see yourself. If he struggled with his own battles, he may have passed them on unintentionally, simply by example. You might have grown up believing that emotional restraint is strength, silence is maturity, never needing help is independence, exhaustion is normal, and your worth must be earned. But look at how those beliefs have worn you down. Look at how tired you feel, how disconnected, how you replay conversations for hours, how you hesitate to speak your mind, how you feel guilty resting, how you freeze when you should rise, how praise feels uncomfortable, and how numb you've become to joy. None of this is weakness. It's conditioning, the kind no one ever talks about. Healing begins with honesty, and honesty begins here. You did not become this way alone. You learned your hesitations, your defenses, your fears, your emotional patterns from the environment you grew up in. When people tell you to simply be confident, they don't realize you were raised in a world where confidence felt unsafe, where being too loud, too bold, too honest could create conflict. But you can outgrow the blueprint you inherited. You're not doomed to repeat what shaped you. The moment you even start questioning your patterns, the moment something inside you whispers, maybe this isn't really me, you've already stepped into a new level of awareness. Something your father may never have reached. That isn't weakness. That is evolution. To rebuild yourself, though, you must do something difficult. See your father not just as a parent, but as a person. A person with his own fears, doubts, insecurities, and emotional wounds. A person who may never have received the tools he needed. A person who did what he could, even when it wasn't enough. Understanding this doesn't excuse the impact, but it makes the weight easier to unpack. It helps you realize your patterns are not defects. None of this made him a bad man. It made him human. But it also meant you spent your childhood defending yourself against things a child should never have needed protection from. And perhaps that's why you feel weak today. Not because you lack strength, but because you grew up in survival mode. You learned how to read his moods instead of your own. You learned how not to upset him rather than how to express yourself. And survival mode changes the brain. That isn't poetry, it's neuroscience. When a child grows up in unpredictability or emotional distance, their stress pathways Confidence and decision-making become shaped around danger, not possibility. Think about how much of you is molded by trying to decode someone else's emotions. How you hid parts of yourself because being seen never felt safe. That's not weakness, it's adaptation. You did what you needed to survive. But what protected you as a child becomes the very thing that limits you as an adult. Emotional freezing becomes indecision. Self-doubt becomes false humility. Avoiding conflict becomes a mistaken sense of peace. Dependence on no one becomes what you think is strength. Expecting little becomes what you call realism. Staying small becomes what you believe is simply your personality. But what if these habits were never true choices? What if they were chosen for you? Because your relationship with your father became the blueprint for how you relate to yourself. If he never supported your dreams, you learned to doubt them. If he rarely expressed pride, you learned to live for external validation. If he avoided emotion, you learned to suppress yours until they became overwhelming. If he carried unresolved fear, you inherited the echoes of it without ever understanding where they came from. Yet despite all this, you don't need to carry on the story you inherited. People underestimate how deeply a father's energy imprints itself upon a child. Not through speeches, but through tone, presence, silences. There comes a moment in life when you look in the mirror and realize you're carrying a weight you never chose. A heaviness you never agreed to hold. A story that didn't begin with you, yet somehow became yours to complete. You may have never said it aloud, but somewhere deep inside, you've always known that the person you became, or the person you fear becoming, is tied in some way to the man who raised you, or the man who didn't. It isn't about blame. It isn't about pointing fingers at someone who perhaps never knew any better. It's about the quiet truths that surface when everything else fades. When the noise disappears, and the only thing left is the question you've been avoiding for years. Why do I feel so weak? Why do I struggle with things others find simple? Why do I keep fighting invisible battles no one else sees? And more often than not, the beginning of the answer leads back to your father. A father doesn't only raise a child. He raises the child's inner voice, the voice that speaks when you doubt yourself, when you're trying to impress someone, when you fail, when you hesitate before taking the next step. For some people, that voice is gentle. For others, it's sharp. For many, it's missing altogether. But for you, perhaps it became a voice that makes you shrink instead of rise, a voice that whispers hesitation instead of courage, a voice echoing patterns inherited long before you understood them. You may have wondered why you crumble under pressure or avoid opportunities that could make your life better. It isn't because you were born weak. It's because you learned to breathe in a world shaped by someone else's fears. Children learn strength from the adults they watch. They learn whether the world is safe or dangerous, whether emotions are meant to be expressed or hidden, whether mistakes are normal or shameful. If your father raised you with silence, you learn to silence yourself. If he raised you with anger, you learn to walk carefully, measuring every.
Picture this: moonlight, ancient castle, and a mystery waiting to be solved. Let me tell you what happened next.